Hello again, I'm Matthew from lightandmatter.org, and I'm back this time with my review and comparison of the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 art series lens for Sony E-mount and the Tamron 28-75mm f2.8 lens, also for Sony E-mount. These are both really excellent lenses. I'm constantly amazed by how much better lenses are these days compared to even just 10 years ago. But there are some obvious differences in these lenses beyond the small differences in zoom range. The Sigma is about 0.2 of an inch longer, and the front element and filter threads are quite a bit larger than the Tamron, which helps explain why it is also so much heavier. The Sigma weighs 1.84 pounds, which is slightly less than the equivalent Sony G-Master lens, but it's still over half a pound more than the Tamron, which is pretty significant in a package this size. They're both weather sealed, but the Sigma also has a manual focus switch, an autofocus lock button, and a zoom lock switch, while the Tamron has gone minimalist and has no buttons or switches at all. I mentioned that these lenses have different zoom ranges, and the most important of these is at the wide angle end. Let's start by taking a quick look at how much difference there is between the 24mm end of the Sigma and the 28mm end of the Tamron. I shot these bridges up at Deception Pass, with both lenses at their widest setting. When I overlay the 28mm on top of the 24, roughly, you can get an idea of how much more the 24mm lens is capturing around the entire frame. And since the background is so far away, I can't just make up for the difference by taking a few steps backwards with the Tamron. Here's another example from Queen Anne Hill in Seattle. Again, when they're overlaid, you get a better idea of how much difference there is. At the other end of the zoom range, the Tamron is a bit longer, at 75mm, but the Sigma can match the results with a very minor crop, so it's not as much of an issue. So with that understood, let's take a look at how the resolution of the Sigma compares to the Tamron that you'll already know is very sharp if you've seen my previous videos. I shot these with a Sony a7R III and used my standard testing procedure. If you don't have a 4K monitor, I'd recommend taking a look at the photos in the full review on my website to get an idea of these differences that won't be visible in the video on lower resolution monitors. Let's start at the 70mm end of the zoom, wide open at f2.8 in the center of the frame. We can see immediately that both of these lenses have excellent resolution already. The Tamron is a little bit more contrasty, which may make it look sharper, but they're resolving about the same amount of detail. Any difference here is negligible for practical purposes. Stop down to f4, they're both even sharper. The individual bricks on these buildings are visible, and I was over a mile away. The moire patterns on the roofs at the bottom of the frame here are stronger on the Tamron side, which indicates that there's a bit better resolution here at the sensor, but again, it's a tiny difference. At f5.6, there's almost no difference at all. They both look excellent. I'm calling them even here. And I'd say the same thing for f8. No significant difference. So let's move away from the center of the frame a little bit. Out here at f2.8, things look really similar to how they looked in the center. The Tamron has a little more contrast, and it's just possible that there's a little higher resolution looking at some of the details like this crane here on the right side of the frame, but if there's a difference, it's a tiny one. At f4, they're both looking really good again. Maybe a tiny edge to the Tamron, but maybe I'm just imagining it. They're both really close. And the same thing is true at f5.6, and also at f8. Beyond f8, they're both diffraction limited on this camera and look pretty much identical. Finally, moving out to the edge of the frame on the right side here, I don't think that the Tamron has any advantage here. Looking at the text on the freeway signs and the cables on the cranes, they look really identical here. Stop down to f4, I think that the Tamron gains enough extra resolution here that I'd say that it has a tiny edge, but again, they're extremely close, and the same thing remains true when you stop down to f5.6. At f8, there's almost no change, but I think there's enough to say that the Sigma is exactly on par with the Tamron here. Okay, so that's the telephoto end of the zoom. Now let's take a look at the wide angle end at 28mm. Here at f2.8 in the center of the frame, the Tamron actually looks just a little bit softer than the Sigma. It's visible on details around the frame generally, like the spokes of the Ferris wheel in the background, but it might be most noticeable on the side of this building, where the Sigma is resolving enough detail to produce a moire pattern, while there's almost none on the Tamron side. But again, they both look really good. Stopping down to f4, they now have evened up, and I don't see any difference between them at all. And although they both sharpen up a little bit at f5.6 and also at f8, neither one pulls ahead for any practical purposes. They end up looking identical to me. Now, moving away from the center a little bit, at f2.8 again, the Sigma is resolving the fine details just a little bit better than the Tamron. If you look at the antennas on top of all of these buildings downtown, they are visible with both lenses, but we're getting crisper edges with the Sigma. At f4, the resolution of the Sigma improves noticeably, but it stays about the same on the Tamron side, so it becomes even more clear that the Sigma is sharper here. At 5.6, I see some good improvement on the Tamron side, but the Sigma is also improving and gives us better resolution. Again, pretty easily noticeable on the antennas on top of these buildings. At f8, the Tamron closes the difference a little bit more, but it doesn't quite catch up completely. Beyond 8, again, they're both diffraction limited and are pretty much identical. Finally, let's take a look at CenturyLink field at the edge of the frame. Looking at these container cranes in the corner, the Sigma is quite a bit sharper, and in fact, this is probably the first time in this resolution comparison that I'd say it's a significant difference, though it's not a dramatic difference. At f4, the Tamron sharpens up quite a bit, but doesn't quite catch up with the Sigma, which is getting to be really quite sharp for the edge of a wide-angle zoom. Not a whole lot changes when we stop down to f5.6. I don't even see much improvement on the Sigma side. Stopping down to f8 though, the Tamron has improved enough so that it's just about equal to the Sigma. So to sum this up, I'd say that at the 70mm end, the two lenses are virtually identical, but I'd lean towards the Tamron being slightly sharper with marginally better resolution, especially away from the center of the frame a little bit. At the wide-angle end, though, I'd say that the Sigma is marginally but consistently giving us higher resolution, especially at the edges of the frame. In both cases, the differences that I'm seeing here are small enough that I'd expect any variation from sample to sample might be enough to push one lens over the other in terms of being the highest resolution, but I wouldn't choose either one of these lenses over the other based on resolution alone. I suspect that they'd look identical on a lower resolution camera, like a 24 megapixel A7 III. Now, because of the COVID pandemic, I wasn't able to do any real sports or action shooting with the Sigma 24-70 when I was testing it last spring. When I went out to cover one of the early George Floyd protests, I did get a taste for how it would handle event coverage, though. Autofocus was quick and reliable, and face and eye detection worked nicely. I briefly shot some video footage with the lens, but as I mentioned in my previous lens review, I got tear-gassed and I had to call it an early day. When I went back the next day to look at the aftermath, I found that a lot of downtown businesses were boarding up broken windows or proactively covering intact ones, and they were also painting some colorful murals. With the 24mm end of the Sigma, I could capture an entire group of painters while standing on the same side of the street. I loved the giant blue field of color that this woman was painting, along with the shapes of the shadows and the ladder. Down towards First Avenue, a pair of painters were working on another one, and here I was able to make use of the Sigma's 24mm end to emphasize the painted foreground on the right side, while creating some leading lines to the painter on the left. But then, with the same lens at the 70mm end, I could also capture some tighter close-up shots. I shot around the city a bit more, but I mostly wanted to stay away from the crowds, so I spent some extra time out shooting landscapes. I took the lens to the Palouse in eastern Washington, and also took some black and whites up on Fidalgo Bay. And again, the lens performed nicely. Just to see what I could get, I shot a few close-ups of some flowers for comparison purposes. This photo is a tiny wildflower shot at the Sigma's minimum focus distance at 70mm, with my fingertip in there for scale. Here's the same flower with the Tamron at 75mm at its minimum focus distance. There's not much of a difference, as you can see. I've been shooting with the Tamron lens for a couple of years now, so I've had a chance to evaluate it thoroughly, shooting everything from street photography to portraits, to cityscapes and landscapes. And I love this lens, especially when I'm traveling. The compact size and lightweight construction of this lens really make a difference when I'm traveling internationally, or even just hiking with my camera, and I still get all of the detail that I need. And I've used the lens to take thousands of sports and action photos, and a few accidental wildlife photos. And the autofocus performance has always been at least as good as any other lens on my Sony. Now before I wrap this up, let's take a quick look at bokeh. All of these were shot wide open at f2.8. This is the full frame of the shot that I took with both lenses in the beautiful expanse of my parking garage during lockdown. If we zoom in a bit, we can see that both lenses produce some onion rings in the highlights, but the Tamron has especially strong contrasty borders. This is shot in a slightly different location, but the results are very similar. When there aren't any bokeh balls though, the results are not as obviously different. The Tamron is definitely more contrasty and looks a bit more busy in general, and the Sigma is a little smoother. Which one you like better though is really a matter of personal taste. I think I prefer the Sigma in most cases, though I think in some cases I actually enjoy the more defined shapes and blur of the Tamron. So where does that leave us? The wide-angle end of the zoom range gives the Sigma a clear advantage, while the size and weight of the Tamron really makes it ideal for frequent travelers. The Tamron is perhaps marginally sharper at 70mm, and the Sigma is a bit sharper at the 28mm end, but I'm tempted to call them both a tie. The autofocus performance of the Tamron is rock solid, but I didn't really have enough opportunity to test the Sigma in that regard, so I can't recommend one over the other. And I generally prefer the bokeh of the Sigma, but that's just a matter of personal taste. Luckily, the two lenses are pretty similar in price, with the Sigma costing $1,100 and the Tamron $880. so neither should be out of reach even for hobbyists. After using the Tamron for a couple of years, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to anyone. It's sharp, it focuses quickly and reliably, and it's nice and lightweight. That said, the image quality of the Sigma is equally good overall. It provides a wider zoom range, and the price is not much higher. The Sigma is significantly bigger and heavier, and while that can be a serious issue for those of us who travel frequently or hike, it's still only a half-pound difference, and many people won't be bothered by that at all. Ultimately, each one of these lenses has its advantages. Get the one that suits your photography and your lifestyle. They're both excellent lenses. In my next review, I'll be taking a look at the third lens of this trinity, the Tamron 17-28 f2.8, along with the Sigma 14-24 f2.8. If you'd like to see that video, then I hope you'll subscribe and ring that bell icon, and either way, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. It's a huge help for small channels like mine. And that's it. Stay safe out there, everyone.